로종 디 로종 다 가르친 로종 제거를 세지. 그러 딩안줄다 저하다 마송나 지여바이나 데스 팽그맨로 선선. 가르친 로종 거를 슬라운디 간주스 더 남기 용다 다 참이 슈데 맞아 대어대바다 동안 문제바 디 애니 미지그 쇠샤와 마임바 지 왕유 지기 셰샤와 마임바 땡우 네출 아니 간주 샘감 근도단디 대어대바다 동안 문제바 임바디 야차 야탄바라스 딘자 대어드비야기 톱당 대어드고요바 동안 세야기 톱당 동안 세고요바 응외는 차인자 다 대두기 짜와 비길이야 문제지 온디 샘라여 투요바 로라여 투요바 어딘지지 차네 안 로종기 냠랭기 다 탑티 송여바디 야지야탄 버려왔으라.
So we are looking at a mind training text that is called Mind Training Like the Rays of the Sun, and we're going to continue with these teachings. But before we do so, we're just going to remind ourselves why we take up the practice of mind training. We take up the practice of mind training because, first of all, we recognize that all of us are seeking happiness and none of us wants to experience suffering. And this wish for happiness and the wish to avoid suffering is not something that is created for us by someone else. It's not that we are forced to seek happiness and to avoid suffering. It's rather that naturally on the mental level, this is what motivates us, that basic wish to be well, to be happy, to avoid suffering and pain. Not only we have the wish for that, we also have the right to be happy and the right to avoid suffering. And the root of the happiness that we seek and the suffering that we wish to avoid is our mind, our own mind. And for that end, we take up the practice of mind training.
어디리 딘자 다 동할 기자와 로 간다질이야 투고레 송디 다 용다 송데디 차단기 라 동한 무슨 정인디 아니 차단이 바디 다 베시오레스 딘자 차단 기자와디 마리발에 투여바 딘자 달로 종야기 비기 로파 아니 세야기 세규 로디 아니 차단 싸울기 마리고 쯔비 차단 모습 로 디디 아니 세고여바 아니 데비 싸와디 아니 펜디기 삼바 인지 삼바 어딘지라 소바디 아니 데비기 종고 차원자 디조 셔럽래야 로 세마질래야 툭되기 여반자 아니 셔럽 준 거야 셔럽 줘야기 아니 탑조디 네룩 tomba니 텐텐치니 간진 네룩 타라가르마 디기 텐치니 아니 셔럽 준 거 여바디 아니 도규 콩고 고마디레스 라.
So the root of suffering is the mind. When we look at how the root of suffering is within our own mind, we can first of all recognize clearly how because of anger and attachment, we end up experiencing suffering. This is very clear that these two states of mind, anger and attachment, result in suffering. But anger and attachment in turn are based on ignorance. And so long as we do not dispel ignorance, anger and attachment for that long, we will still continue to experience suffering. So this is what we need to do. We need to rid ourselves of anger, attachment, and ignorance. And in order to do so, we develop states of mind that produce happiness. We develop the wish to be of benefit to others. We develop compassion, and these lead to happiness. But these states of mind are also based on the development of wisdom. Wisdom that is a valid cognition. And when we develop our wisdom, we develop an insight into different levels of reality, coarse levels of realities and subtle levels of reality. And this is the intention of all the sutras and tantras, leading us along these stages for the development of wisdom, understanding reality, and other positive states of mind so that we can use them in order to eliminate our own afflictive states of mind, which constitute the root of suffering.
셴쇼라야 담위기 아니 삼바 슈쳔보 착돌라 소바 벤 슈쳔보 유 데사기 딘디지기 찌ጾ나로야 아니 비 냠루 내가 치야라야 깔락하고 쇼도 왔어 강가로 많던 마칭에 아니 내가 춘주 제고 줬나야 디 타만디 버치야디 아니 착도단 댄셈다 아니 지 란쇼라 차바 샹쇼라 당 로 딘티기 왕기 아니 간줄이야 간지 점지 템비 내가 식자원인 제주금도 왔어.
So this is what we seek to put into practice, and yet we see that when we try to put that into practice in order to develop our mind, we encounter difficulties, and sometimes we encounter trivial difficulties, quite simple difficulties, but in our mind they become quite massive in terms of they prevent us to a greater degree from developing our mind. Like, for example, we encounter different situations in our life in which we become jealous, or we develop a sense of competitiveness. We develop attachment to those in our side and aversion to those in somebody else's camp. And those different afflictive states of mind are those which hinder or obstruct us from the development of such positive states of mind.
이내 딱고 몽비기 샤만도 줄데디 마리비 샤만도 줄데디 아니 디들이야 단도 겹결치야마도 디마직 뇽을따야기 탑시 거란 땡땡금도 왔어. 들치원딩 안도 치조 타만디고 차려야지. 아니 치조 타만디고 차 게소소인 바이나야 신디기 아니 차와만도 개와 치미기 대대만도 아니 간지 동안 바실에 내 대와디 차담 몽송 돈이 제기여바디 야지야단 바리스로.
And these afflictive states of mind, which are based on ignorance or confusion, are getting more support, in a sense that we support our own sense of confusion. We continue to hold on to our confusion, to ignorance, and we fail to oppose, to apply a certain opposition to our own afflictive states of mind. And we can see how it creates problems for us, not only on a personal level, but also in society. It creates problems for us in this life, but also in future lifetimes. It undermines our own happiness and well-being, and it gives rise to additional degrees of suffering for us in this and future lifetimes.
데레베나 소섬 여딩이 남주 여딩이 미지기 랑 샤니 탐지기 된룹투야지 간지 심전 탐지기 체도 산기 공부 룹투야 돼 아니 로디기 될 때는 연구도 왔어 셴 주변줄라 때니 연구도 왔어 로디기 남주 셰럽 남주 자도 템바 아니 지 로제께 토바 아니 지 미신 가르쳐 송나야 될야 아니 그 우연니스도 템비기 아니 소보검투야 오 딘티 토니 에 산지 공부에는 룹투고라스 딘자 디기 자와디 디디 레스야디 공부에는 차데 여바치로.
And if we become patient, if we develop wisdom, we will leave our own purpose aside and focus on the welfare of other living beings, attempting to accomplish the greater welfare of other living beings. And for that end, we, at least in this tradition, aim at attaining the state of Buddha in order to be able to be of benefit to other living beings, so that we'll be able to accomplish their welfare. And in order to do that, we use our wisdom, the development of wisdom. We develop our mind, we make our mind broad, vast, and spacious. These are the ways of developing our mind. So it doesn't have to do with how much money we have or how many resources we have. It has to do with the development of our own wisdom, developing patience that is able to cope with sufferings and problems which are caused to us by other people or other situations. These are the ways of developing our mind so that we'd be able to accomplish the greater benefit of other living beings through the development of patience, wisdom, and so forth.
레디 공고요 배낭안조 안지 저스미 영이 남주 영이 메지인바나 즉 소수기 자산 경고 존이야 메제디 기부 대부직 돈이 게트고라서 지조질에 샌드 쉬고 전에야 조심다 남주 여바이나 펜뉴 뎀비 아니 지조라에 샌드 쉬도야 아니 타르 산기 공부디나 텔드는 드부도야 딘디지 연구 여반자 아니 산기기 추 자와디 잠년지 잔주고 셈 안 동번이 또비 셔르브르세디 오늘 탄에 디차기도 왔으라 텐정안주다 로종을 주비거든 인지 미지기 아니 랭고야디 디기디 차고 왔으레스.
Well, we can see how the development of these positive states of mind affect a life. To begin with, they affect a personal relationship. We can live happily in our relationship with another person if we develop wisdom and patience and so forth. Not only on a personal level, but also when we see how we can live in harmony with those around us in our society. It also has a great effect over the situation in our society, and even more so when you think of attaining the state of liberation or the state of enlightenment, which come through the development of loving kindness and compassion, bodhicitta, wisdom, and so forth. We have to develop those states in order to contribute to our own personal happiness in society, and finally, in order to attain the state of enlightenment. They come through wisdom, patience, and so forth.
레드주 당한주 카열라요 편도 디니 총투고 그랬으라 소셈당 지 아니 셴레야 구구르당 제와 아니 지 어딘디 남주 셔르여 바이나 아니 소소 카발 데나이네 지소 카발 드러나야 소소베 아니 기부 데부직 토네 야자 야타만 로투고 서레스 다 소소 남주 만단디 아니 카발 드러나 카발 데나야 아니 다 만딩이지다 마기와지 용대야디 야시 야타마레스라.
So for that end, we take up the practice of mind training, in training a mind in patience and in sense of care for others, a sense of concern for others, wisdom, and so forth, so that wherever we are, whatever situation we find ourselves, wherever we live, we'd be able to live happily. Whereas if your wisdom is not sufficient, wherever you find yourself, wherever you live, even if conditions are good, you'll still be unhappy. There will be still situations which will disturb your mind if your wisdom is not sufficient.
트레다 랑안주다 기부세디 아니 삼로고 토니 용고도스라 다 타기부세디 코 벤조라 라레데와 틴디치라 타기부치야라 코비기 차겐토소 다 용거를 모두 원내기 기마기세디 시디 자와디 셈라 투여바디 야시게다 말이지 딘자 만주시에데 로종디나로라야 가르송거리 시디기 자와 디기기 자와 아니 셈라 투당 름바디 송거자 다 로종에 름바디 딘리질라야 자니 로종 제바이나 아니 니마칭 로종 제디기 디 츠기 아니 소졸라야 펜도용아치 용구여서레스 먼저 따출 노바이나 계란 니마지무 그 아니 메제 간자지 로종라 카초바이나야 아니 로종 제단데 마시바이나 로종기 로종 투구마라와스라 로종기 로종 마투나 아니 텔덴비기 아니 펜유디 용구마라와스라.
And therefore, our happiness depends upon our way of thinking. And for that reason, we say that the root of our happiness is in the mind. It depends upon our mind. And therefore, here we take up the training of the mind training, or in Tibetan, Lojong practice. We do that because we recognize that the root of our happiness and well-being is in the mind. And if we don't take up this practice, not even for a single day, we'll still continue to experience problems and difficulties throughout our life. We might study this tradition, but without putting it into practice, without training a mind in that way, we're not going to be able to develop the root of our happiness, which lies within the mind itself. So having said that, we're going to go back to the text, to our mind training text, and pick up from the section that explains the actual way to meditate on death and impermanence.
로종라 수자고라스 다 처음마다 삼니 로 가르종 투그레스 처음마다 삼비 로디 가른 교와 땅 투그레스 가른 교와 땅식이 타브레스 로 딘디기 파주지 먼저 저틀링 로지 여바이나 덴데 아니 캬란줄이야 펜도 요비 레오요레스.
So in looking at the actual way to consider death and impermanence, we're going to look at questions and issues such as, for example, why are we thinking of death and impermanence? What is the benefit of thinking of death and impermanence? How is it that our perspective over different things changes if we contemplate death and impermanence? All those different questions come up when we look at this topic of the contemplation of death and impermanence.
제 단 처음부터 삼비 로디기 조 칼미기어스라운디 단지슈와 나지 차단 몽솜세 라 차단인기 자와디 몸바 마리비 제여봐 단 몸바 마리비기 니 옹시온디 몸바 마리발야 차라 마무지 용도 아스라 텐자 페나 차와다 라바니 체니 아니 락비기 몸바디 페나 땅징기 로트세디 라 땅징기 로디 몸바 라바드 차고레스 다 땅징 몸바 라바 땅징기 로디기 님불이야 아니 마다고도비 셔럽 트윈치니 땅징기 로도 도고요라스 데자 아니 땅징기 로기 님보 마다바 곰비 로디 데송고요레스.
So what are we focusing on when we contemplate death and impermanence? Well, first of all, we recognize that our afflictive states of mind, anger, attachment, and so forth, arise on the basis of ignorance, on the basis of confusion. And ignorance and confusions have different levels. There are coarse levels of ignorance and subtle levels of ignorance. So a coarser level of ignorance would be, for example, grasping at permanence, believing or grasping that we are permanent, that we are eternal. This is a coarse level of ignorance, and the contemplation of death and impermanence directly antidotes this level of ignorance.
아니 가를 하로레스라운디 깨와니 깨와 균 드로이게 직다 아니 다득지 거라왔어 다 다득지야디 하로게서레스 간지 안데 깨와 치말라 드로고게 반자 깨와 치말라야 드로비기 직 가서다 차긴 산 사자 가발레바이나야 텔라야 직피 데비깔라야 수술은 튕긴 가르고도 대난신기 깨와 치말라 드로비깔라야 튕긴 가르고도 가르키 초고도 가르키 투도 어드소지 아니 약부지 싸마도바나 아니 깨와 치만 드비 갑둘라이 가야 메바치 남자단 직자단 겨버코랑 토니 드로고에 차와나 아니 동안 바식기 나니 아니 차대지 최고연자 안 단단히 니니 디톨이야 타디치에 최고도 타디치에는 고겐디 땅징글로디 치도 딘자 마다바 상고도 세 딘지 송고레스라.
So when we think of the grasping at permanence that we have in our mind, the belief that we are permanent, well, Geshe said that for us, and Geshe also says that for himself, we have the grasping at permanence, which prevents us from thinking of reality in an accurate way, in a precise way. And so long as we grasp at permanence, and we are thus prevented from recognizing reality, the transient nature of our life, we fail to make preparation for going from this lifetime to the next. So we are going to go from this lifetime to the next. Death will come and we will proceed to a next lifetime. And we need to make preparations for the transition from this lifetime to the next. If we are not going to make the adequate or the requisite preparations for next lifetime, we will end up experiencing problems. It's just like thinking that if you have to travel tomorrow, the day after, to another place, you're going to start thinking of what will you need to take along with you in order to make sure that you can live or stay comfortably or happily in the other place. And without making those requisite preparations, you might discover that you don't have what you need in order to live in that place. So similarly, when we think of transitioning from this lifetime to the next, if we're not going to make the right preparation, it is possible that upon a death, we'll be completely gripped with fear and terror or other destructive states of mind, which will only bring about suffering for us at the end of this life and also in future lifetimes. So we need to make preparations. We need to make preparations, and what prevents us from making those preparations is the grasping of permanence, the trust that we are eternal or permanent. So this is what we need to overcome.
어디에 베나 ngada wada lots of dindiji levsave jela 타 쳐봐질이야 로 개지 대와이나야 로 추타 카시치기 제라 갸차 갸담바다 깨와치말이야 드로야라와스 제디네 딘디 투즈 딘디지마도 요 말데네 담도베 대야기 레가 가르쳐봐이나야 룽아 이성구 토니 네버텐사도디 직첸디기 데기 대야기 쳇 아니 코라야 아니 가서 투즈 땅치 kalli gyab deyan roji mado ani chik kewa chimala yan drobi kala ya ani chik pento kari yume kari gu yume tola ya tuzu tanyan di pe nyunyun chagdo asira pe nyunyun chagdo asida.
So for example, Geshe says that looking at his age, reaching his current age, it is certain that in a few decades he'll already be in his future lifetimes. Now, only a few decades left, not a lot of time. So this is certain. And yet still, when he thinks of what he does on a daily basis, most of his activities are focusing on things that belong to this lifetime only, and not thinking of actually quite soon, just within maybe a decade or two, he will already be in his next lifetime. So still being so focused on things that belong to this lifetime and not thinking of what will be of use in future lifetimes is attributed to that grasping at permanence that we have.
Terida dinza benada sosodo kawata kawasambu chongwa inza benachi pama ina ko chode yongenchi yaki and dene chunjung kone ji the pami gi kenchene ani ya chugo suru lama givishi ni sam mekebal ya tebi kadin tene aji metsin dinanglo la ya metsin di chedo bi chik chego samsong ki chagdang gi shawan songchene ani chi tuzu di peshe rochi tanyo mes ro tanda yimba ina ya chi sosu thagi uchaya da chi sosu kibu yoya gi chedo besun chene pigi koji dusha ji sawani ni mes semna yungumdos inaya di tsögi sujogi nyamlende yan ting sabu yabu yungu yewesna te mesra niga megyosra jidada resis inaya kanji ani ji sujogi chöjogla ya ani teba tana wana tani yesra gacha gadamba yabu ani shukchembu yes.
So at least Geshe says that on a personal level, it feels quite fortunate. He was born to a family that have a deep sense of trust and faith in the Dharma. He was fortunate enough to have entered a gateway of the Dharma and to have met many lamas and spiritual teachers. So having received Dharma teachings, Geshe feels that on a personal level, it's not that he has this great sense of attachment, which makes him become focused on affairs of this lifetime only, in being mainly and only concerned about accumulating money, accumulating possessions and so forth. While he doesn't have that sense of attachment, still does not mean to say that his practice is deep and profound. So in that sense, Geshe says that when he thinks at least of his own personal situation, he has neither of these two ends, not a great sense of attachment, but also is not strong on the practice side. So then thinking of what prevents oneself from having that strong backup of the practice side, well, one of them is that grasping at permanence. In terms of faith and trust in this tradition, Geshe has faith and trust, deep sense of faith and trust, and still he says that on a practical level, his practice is still missing out that sense of conviction.
di karishugo asna anzu sozu be samlodan jan ani lama giwi shingi dune ani chi tuzu shutu su drowa ina chi hajangi be tsendela ya ani shenja chembu tosu ani doya chi dai yongdo asra yongdo as timado chi dindiji chome ba ina samade chi ba nga ko mezen nanglo ya chi suzu penjor da suzu chi meze ke dang tola ya ani mi shamba nashin roguras di mandro ya di ani chagi mogo ya beta ya pi dindri zawni maras ina ya di tola ya donanda do masna pedi chinchung shu chaya di ani lamagi wishini kadi su suzu chi loka chosa pi ani yul de manda wa inza an di toni chongware samsam roj kanji lama kunjo tuji kadi nya chiri samsam samna yongya di dindri res ro ta dindri ji toni mezi ki to bana maran sambala ani kewa chemana yaktaju yungre samsam ki rewa chi yes ro.
So the more we study, the more we think, the more we train our mind along these thoughts, the more we are able to release that strong grasping and clinging that we have to affairs that belong to this lifetime only. Otherwise, if we don't think about those issues, if we don't think about them, contemplate them and so forth, we might still hold on very tightly, very forcefully to things that belong to this lifetime only, wealth and possessions and so forth. So Geshe says that on a personal level, he doesn't have that strong sense of clinging and attachment to those things that belong to this lifetime only, and yet still in terms of having the diligence and effort that is required in order to develop his mind, he said that is still lacking. But in order then to be able to increase the effort and the hard work that is required in order to develop one's mind, we contemplate the topic that we have at hand, death and impermanence, and being able to recognize that we have the ability to do so as we have encountered the Dharma, we've encountered spiritual teachers, lamas, and so forth, is the recognition of how fortunate we are to be able to use the conditions that we have in order to develop our mind. So the more you're able to recognize that, the more you're able to recognize that you have the conducive conditions for mental development, and you're also mindful of the brevity of this lifetime, the more you allocate time for mental development.
Sambigi, Lodhigi, Anichi, Sindelaya, Shanja Nyondra, Kiava Chimigi, Tundruyagi, ya Lo Chotuyagi, Tapshi Yashudi, and Madawa Sambi Lodris, or Dundusoyores Ra.
It is said that the best way to change our orientation, our priorities, is to meditate on death and impermanence, to contemplate death and impermanence, so that we want to change our orientation so that we will reduce the attachment that and the clinging that we have to this life. And our focus will shift to what will occur to us in future lifetimes. For that, we contemplate death and impermanence.
Redinza da Chomadava Simzu Wood Kandajiris Laundi, Chomadava Samzu Wood Karis Laundi, Chirchiwangi, Namchilaya, Chame, Chivitsu Chomado, Kangijan, Mabembi Sursumlis, Sursumli, Tambuni, Chidang Nibor Hondi, much suggestion Chilog.
So we're going to start the section that explains how to think about the brevity of this life, death and impermanence. What page is it in the text? 26? All right, so for those of you who have the hard copy in front of you, it's in page 26. So the actual contemplation of death and impermanence consists of three main points. First of all, we contemplate the certainty of death, then that the time of death is uncertain, and finally, that at the time of death, nothing will be of help apart from the Dharma.
That susulaya gunzema sunguyasare tamboni chida ngebar on this lu chindashi langyang chiwale mandete some lebempa kanya sanje ransanje sanje nyam namji nyentu kya kulundun ponzena kewon power hujugu.
So as we look at those three main sections, it says the actual ways to think of death, about death, are to reflect on the inevitability of death, the uncertainty of the time of death, and that only the doctrine or the Dharma can help at the time of death. We begin with the first point, the inevitability of death. And it says, death is certain to come because no one who has a body can avoid dying. In the special verses collected by topic, it says, if Buddha, solitary realizers and hearers have all abandoned their bodies, what can be said about ordinary beings? In whatever land you may live, you can never avoid death.
Reda dinanolaya lu chindashi langyang sech lu chindashi langyang chiwale mandes ro lu chindashi lang bayanaya lu de torgores odi ro ta chi senamasna lu de torgores lu lang silawandi rang la yobayna lang sewagi sigdin jugumarwas ro lang sadi shenjin su langbalaya 고고그러was 된자 셴이 출랑비기 류 간르치기 바이나야 파토르고 그랬어
셴출 근데
셴 베나 방말라 소바 로
okay.
렌세디
So it says here in this verse, if Buddha's solitary realizers and hearers have all abandoned their bodies, what can be said about ordinary beings? In that we have taken a body such as this. And when we say we have taken a body such as this, it means that the body that we have, it's not something that has arisen on its own accord. We have taken such a body from, for example, from our parents. So when we think of taking a body, we can take different forms of bodies. We can have different body, and yet just by the mere fact that we have taken a body, it means that death is inevitable.
There is that big sangi kor ani nyentu ani rangela soba kanji drajon bi komba tabsangi jinaya ani big ludi torgogdas tiim bayna ta nganzu keo phaba kayam missing en sogi lud torgobada ta shemugo barwas muchugo said.
And as this verse says, if Buddha's solitary realizers and hearers, they also have abandoned their bodies, the bodies that they've taken, then of course, when we look at ourselves, ordinary beings, it goes without saying that we will also have to give up the body that we have now. Needless to say that we will also die at one point.
You can't do negang, chivali mandidi, tenyele, can't do nenawan, chiv mutsubi, sabjot in the yoba mindi. Parnalame, Ganzu Naname, Ronam Disum, the Shuname, Chesonsos.
In whatever land you may live, you can never avoid death. The same text says, wherever you live, you're not immune to death, neither on the earth, in any direction, not in space, not within the ocean, nor if you were to hide amidst the mountains.
Pigi legi teondi, ra nubada masuno zondi, 아니 가와 샤나야 가와 데나야 가와 드러나야 아니 그 돌고리 마도 탑시 강요 말했어 지 류 내단 칸다진 바이나야 나지 아니 셴셴이 아니 나 비기 당당이 선선 나지 변조 전부이 나라연 튼제 야부요 세서 써니는 문도스로 안주 그 시위 뒤서들려온디 아니 개인 파만든선 칸다진이야 아니 시로도 탑시 문도스로
So wherever you live, you're not immune to death. In that, when the power of your karma comes to an end, you will die. Wherever you are, whatever body you have, when the karma for this life will run out, you will certainly die, and that cannot be avoided. You might think that you're stable, that your physical condition is good. You might be thinking that I'm still young, that I'm quite wealthy, that I'm rich, and I have all these positions, and yet none of this can ward off death. Death cannot be avoided. Regardless of whether you're young, in the middle of your life, or old, at some point, death will inevitably arrive. So you guys are from Bhutan, right? So Geshe wants to say, touch the lay, welcome everyone. So you guys came up from Brisbane?
in the US.
So have you had a chance before to do some study of Buddhism? Don't be shy.
Yes.
All right, some of you are nodding your head.
아니 누가 비다 얘기도 찍붙찍장 간지 먼저 찍붙찍장 레도 왔으러 먼저 산집이 출려야 오늘 단내 대바 슈치 대바 독도 매바 요레스 디나야 먼저 까우까려야 대바 독도 매바 요바 있나야 지금 오늘 단내 산집이 추 오마디 가리 이메 털려야 장바 제디야 까우까려 투션 정도로 차기도 왔으러
Bhutanese and Tibetans are using exactly the same script. And also the type of faith that you grow up with is irreversible faith. So that's the same for Tibetans and Bhutanese. But also what happens sometimes is that people are a bit negligent about making sure that they study their own tradition. So it's quite common in Tibetan society, and Geshe reckons also in Bhutanese society, that you have this faith that is really strong, unshakable faith, but still you don't use the opportunities that you have to become informed, to learn about the Buddha Dharma.
디지디게 페나 안주 산지 좀 된디기 추줄디 고통 야간이 다려봐. 대딩이 랍샤기 말다스러 안 겨울무치 우치비게 안주 추기 리스 마치비게 라신 사말로게 송대 드레스 안주 넘버 산지 위치디 아니 야간이 마 다르신 야간이 진다 샤조 둔마 아니 지 야나리 페리다 안 사말로 사절이야 아니 산지 위치도 다려와스 제디네야 단디 차려야 그 잠보 단전시야반 단디 차려야 아니 지 산지기 쳐디 비기 퇴섬 곰섬 제체네 간지 산지기 송나와야 싹제 달이 세신세 싹제 달슴 기고네 아니 비기 제버체네 산지기 추즈 드마메반 진댕인게 땡닌 로디 아니 바급질이야 배 간지 중 차버레스 다리네 이나야 고 겐지기 토네 단디 차려야 별라야 라마 메바 배 마스바 칼카부 차데부 카둘라야 겨울무치 우치비기 추기르스 마지비 라시망부치 야가리 두그리 바유리 히말 저기 아니 요론 디기들이야 폐브체니 산지 땜바 죽여레스 겨울무치 이바이나 단디 잘라야다 지 레와치슈로디 변나로라야 딘디기베 아니 담자다 강하게 토니 니만나시 제투메디다 레와 마슈 갸사디 히마찰 촉 베나 라다리 메리 데는 두그리 바유 촉래야 아니 토리 쉬우지 경고도 왔으라 딘지 캐난조 아니 쉔쉔리 아니 로종요레 티치디기 인지미직 아니 산지 추디 장진으로 산지 원을 토마 가르손도 바르도 가르손도 타마 가르손도 디가 잠블리야 칼 팽도 딘지 돌에 제바진 산지 추 장바이나 아니 도트 메비 대바생인디 용고도 왔으라
The origin of the Buddha Dharma is India. It's not that just Geshe is saying that the origin of the Buddha Dharma is India. When you look at, first of all, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and also the many great lamas and spiritual teachers belonging to all spiritual traditions within this form of Buddhism, all of them agree that the origin of the tradition that we practice is India. And as Buddhism arose in India, it made its way to different parts of Asia, to China and Tibet and Bhutan and other parts of Asia. But now when we think of the way that we engage with the Buddha Dharma, with Buddhism, we do that through study, reflection, and meditation. And we study, reflect, and meditate on the teachings of the Buddha in the same way that you were to analyze a nugget of gold, to make sure that the piece of gold that you have in your hand is an authentic piece of gold. So you might burn it or melt it in fire, you might rub it or cut it into pieces in order to make sure that what you have is an authentic piece of gold. So similarly, we want to make sure that we uphold the teachings of the Buddha through study, reflection, and meditation to make sure that we still hold on to an authentic Buddhist tradition. And the ability to do that in a complete way, to study, reflect, and meditate on the teachings of the Buddha, to be able to do that is found now, it seems, in the Tibetan tradition. So then when we think of how we continue with our study, reflection, and meditation so that we'll be able to uphold the Buddhist tradition in this way. In Tibet nowadays, being under the control of China, not having freedom, this is quite limited. But then His Holiness the Dalai Lama and also many spiritual teachers belonging to different traditions within Tibetan Buddhism and other Buddhist traditions, those that live in Bhutan and Nepal and India and so forth, have the ability to do that. So this is also, when we do that, we also fulfill the wishes, the hopes of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So you have, when you look at the Himalayan region, Ladakh and Mun, Bhutan, India, Nepal, and so forth, you have ample opportunities for making sure that you use whatever ability you have at hand to study, reflect, and meditate to become informed about this tradition. And when you approach that, you will ask yourself, what were the things that were taught at the beginning? What was taught in the middle? What were the things that were taught at the end? How is it helping me? How is it beneficial in general? And when you look into those areas, through that irreversible, unshakable faith arises in your mind.
어디리 딘자 베나다 먼저 배바직 바리 아니 난사말로 답이 출래야 대바슈 저디다 직 아니 직 롬보치 인생에다 아니 직 접도 인생에 달라마 인생에 딘지 레온디기다 소소기 직 강여바디페 아니 퓨야라야 상가견 퓨거라스 이내야다 딘디 주스델이야 다 두줄이야 피 캡산 여반자 딘디페 마무 태인거스 롬보치 인생 라마 인생 아지 인생 두조 두조 돌아가서 데 sabsab치고das 소수 모마디피 최 가리바디 최 가리바 장야데 빼마서 개침버려셨어 난주기 지준 잠비야 난주기다 아니 셔럽글 하 쪼임바스 파버 투지 전부 등 난주 인지글 하 쪼임바스 난주 차서서 초파 표사가 유 쪼디 캡추사가 유 쪼디 안 데이트 차가도 왔어 간지 데이트를 캡추니 벤 셔럽글 하 지준 잠비야리 인지글 하 파버 투지 전부리 대sol에 캡추니 타든 가리온 거서디 랑귤이야 셔럽 디케치니 랑귤이야 인지 디케치니 아니 타와드 탐지기미 공발에 로고다스 산지 추 로당 거라 디레스로 대서 인증이 장고 그랬어. 인증이 장고 그랬어. 아니 레
So those that come from Tibetan ethnicities, for example, have this strong faith, particularly when you think of those spiritual teachers that we rely upon. People rush up to make offerings to someone that is called a Rinpoche or a great Siddha, a great practitioner, an accomplished person. If you hear about a Lama, this is to say a reincarnated Lama, then people have this strong faith and they rush to make offerings to someone like that. So this is what happens in Tibetan society. But here, since we look at a setup that we have here in a place like Australia, having Buddhist centers like that, the setup is slightly different. So rather than rushing towards someone that you hear that is a Lama, that is a Rinpoche, that is a Siddha, Geshe reckons that here you can adopt an attitude that is more careful. Rather than just chasing after someone that has the title, it's best to then make sure that first of all, you study. It's really important to do that. So in the Buddhist tradition, for example, we have different deities. Manjushri is regarded as the embodiment of wisdom. Arya Avalokiteshvara, the great compassionate one, is regarded as the embodiment of compassion. So for us, they become main objects of refuge. And when you use them as your main objects of refuge, you get the benefit of expanding your wisdom, developing your compassion, and so forth. And that will lead you along the way for the way to liberation and the way to omniscience, this state of Buddhahood. And in order to do that, first of all, we need to study.
공부를 가르송도 라 데니마 용디다 자란주 죽나야다 비 아니 대바 체슈 된 고르르무치 러브르무치 가르송도 데니직 추루 추기응다 지 라마 치리치데 베는 장골로 중가버치 가르송도 딘디리야 장토바나 땡땡테니 추응마디 싱그레스로 안주기 안주 펠라야 따지 라미 양시 빼마스 다수 전부 요레스로 이나양 아주도 시야때 와이나 산지점 된 디기 양시 생이지 요 말아왔어 공부를 파버토메 아니 레벨로무치 아니 장골로 중가버 전부 되게들 양시 생이지 엔짜치 문지엔지 문도스 다 딜릴 하가지 아니 안주 추 나로라야 딜릴 하기 아니 라마지 원지 체메바스 로
So then thinking of the great masters that we rely upon, like for example, to begin with the Buddha, the Bhagavan, we ask ourselves, what did the Buddha, the Bhagavan teach? What did Nagarjuna teach? What did Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava say? What did he teach? Particularly, Geshe reckons that for our Bhutanese friends, one of the main figures that you rely upon in the Bhutanese tradition is Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava. So what did he teach? What did he say? What did Lama Tsongkhapa say when we think of lamas that belong to other traditions? So when we start to study the teachings of those masters, then we develop certainty that comes from the understanding that we have of the Dharma. And when we then think of the different lamas that we rely upon, one of the titles for a reincarnated lama in Tibetan language is Yangtze, someone that once again was born in cyclic existence in order to benefit others. So you have so many recognized lamas, recognized reincarnations of lamas in the Tibetan Buddhist traditions, hundreds of thousands of them, and people hold them in high regard. Still, when you think about it, it's not that there is like an officially recognized Yangtze or a reincarnation of the Buddha, the Bhagavan. It's not that there's an officially recognized reincarnation of Nagarjuna or Sangha, Lama Tsongkhapa, and so forth. Or Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche. So even though there is no officially recognized reincarnation of them, still when we think of the lamas that we rely upon, there are no higher or better lamas to rely upon that are higher or better than Guru Rinpoche, Lama Tsongkhapa, the Buddha, the Bhagavan, Asanga, Nagarjuna, and so forth.
간지 체란솔이야 도 maybe 대버지게 반자 가서 다 롬바 딘디질이야 까고가 체고요 반자 이제 펜지 토나삼 슈그스 안 체란조 다 롬바 딘디질이야 조 로브종 쳇 페비어와스 로브종 뒤즈 피게 뒤즈 담진친 다 로브종 체고다 슈고마 체란 체고라스 아니 체란조 피게 지 셴데 피야다 뒤즈라 빼가고 이런 게 하고 있어 저거 피야도 얘나야 조디 지 피게 라마리 기시리 딘딜이야 투비 카드라야 아니 드리피아디 조 마레스 조 캐란조기 추 톨이야 깨지틴 로 산지기 추 담보 가르송리 니버 가르송리 타마 가르송도 아니 산지기 추 나노라야 시조 domja원디 싱무비 네출 람드비름바 람탑시니 데부쿠니스 데르다 산지기 추디 dom dinalıyoruz. Dindik tolaya geceti, dindik tolaya samlı tambayına. Hani sanki çöğü çelep semle jugrimado, kenanzu kali gevşi didi hani pünim mulam gana zavi yabures. İnaya tetsamgi hani semlaya tebayonya çelep juya bekhabures ro.
So having said that, Geshe is not wanting to be confrontational or to be critical of others in their approach to Buddhism. This is not the point. When we think of how to benefit our mind in the Buddha Dharma, then we need to look at our approach. So Geshe knows that there are many Bhutanese here in Australia that came as students. So are many of you students here in Australia? So you come here as students, and then when you have time, sometimes you go to temples or to centers and you make offerings, which is good. But then still, when you think of coming up to a temple or to a center, meeting a lama, a geshe, making offerings or showing homage is good. But still, the best way to make offerings is to then start to think and ask questions about the Buddha Dharma. What did the Buddha say at the beginning? What did he say in the middle? What did he teach at the end? To ask questions about it, to become more informed through discussion and study about the principal summation of the Buddha Dharma, the basis, the two truths, the paths of method and wisdom, and the two bodies, which are the results that we attain through developing the path based on the basis. So we discuss that, we ask questions, we think about it, and then we put it into practice. And in this way, we engage the blessings of the Buddha Dharma. So if we don't do that and we just go, we go to a center or to a certain temple, we make offerings, we say prayers, it's good. It's not to say that this is not good, it's good, but still, in terms of really engaging the blessings of the Buddha Dharma that affect your mind to a greater extent, that will come through practice that is based on the understanding and knowledge that you develop. If you do not develop knowledge and understanding, you might say prayers, you might make offerings and so forth, but it would be still very hard to get a massive boost of blessings that will affect your mind.
네, 간주 빼나 간주 단 납쇼 롱발 되어리 아니 납쇼 바기 메소 아니 코 춘중 건 럽종 코란친 레바인자 비기 배짱부도 서로 가디도 나이고 깨지트야디 제워트야디 가디나 제워트야디 빼 지금도 와서 그 내가 달아야 제워티 아니 지 현대 표현도 뇽스 제워트야디 마스 배짱부도 서로 딘디도 대박 거르다시 나야 대박 거르스라 대박 매나 챌린지야 가버스 대비 토네 아니 셰럽 남주 때야지 라 안직 소설 여바도 푸 아니 상르지야 마단 샤자바나 산지기 주약 백하버스 라.
So here outside of the Tibetan tradition, in a place like that, where the culture, you could say that is based on Western culture, it seems that the education system is so strong, has developed, provided education for most people from young age, so that naturally you would say in an environment like that, people become smarter. And then it is quite evident in the approach that people have to the study of the Dharma. Straight off, people have quite a lot of questions, and Geshe feels that in the questions that you get, sometimes it seems that people are getting to the core issues, to those core principles of the Buddha Dharma, and ask questions about it. You can say that, yeah, they make less offerings, but still in terms of the questions and discussion that they have, they really get to those core principle points in the Buddha Dharma. And we need that. It depends upon that. This sense of faith arises in your mind, and through that you engage the blessings of the Buddha Dharma.
당연히 사람은 저기 다잖아도 딩이 사람 가서 다지 페나삼로 shivkuins.
Anyway, with that, Geshe will go back to the text and continue. He said those few words because he thought that it might be of benefit to you. Geshe hopes that it will be of some benefit. With that, let's continue with the text. So we're looking at the moment at mind training like the rays of the sun of Nankapel.
네, 데니엘스 강도내 나온 치유무추비 사셨더니요. 대관들 로셈을 지수. 뒤남 계장 치월에 만들듯 데니엘이 종단 종을 교와 진여바 군질린도 따는 로바다. 대군 지번 기비 똑지디 최라 내징에 받져버죠.
So in thinking of the certainty of death, death is inevitable. The text continues in saying that even taking rebirth does not avert death. Did we read through that? I'm not sure. Let's look at this one. The same text says, wherever you live, you're not immune to death, neither on the earth, in any direction, not in space, not within the ocean, not if you were to hide amidst the mountains. Even taking rebirth does not avert death. The same text says, the wise have understood that those of the past and those that are yet to come have given up this body and are subject to destruction. Therefore, abide in the doctrine, the Dharma, and practice with determination.
다듬어лож네. 쳐달라 드베 마타르스. 치월이야. 당아직 시그르 삼네. 드는 로사지요 말스. 쳐달라 드는 마타르시. 깬 관계견 도드메데스. 갸볼라 담발레. 고물루송. 베나 초신이 로침보 사와. 템바. 힘보다 템바. 마식바. 마케바. 펜바메바. 신두틱바. 찍도 뚜바 식. 신남라 렉진. 살로데. 자단 신당. 신개바당, 야가당, 람탐지당, 심진, 소찬 정보 탐지, 치물 타지 원하는 교배 처음, 또기 도보, 노르기 도보, 제당, 나당, 맨남기 도보 차는 마이너스, 갸보 대진도 지보 침보 신드다 원디, 대달한 교배 처음, 또기 도보, 제당, 나당, 맨남기 도보 라는 마이너스, 지간신의 가와다 나와다 치와, 고바오, 갸보쳔보 가와는 달라 바바 점시오 나와는 내매번 점시오 고바는 포송초바 탐진 점시오 치와는 송 점시오 대단한 교비죠 또기도보 놀기도보 제단 나단 펜남기 도발라와 마이노 시송수스.
So we have one more section to read in relation to the inevitability of the time of death. So it says, the Sutra of Advice for a King says, and as we said before, there is nowhere that you can run to in order to avert death or to ward it off. So it says, suppose 4 great mountains in the 4 directions, solid, stable, essential, uncrumbled, uncracked, unblemished, and very hard, extremely dense, and touching the sky were to be overturned. The grass, forests, tree trunks, branches, all the leaves, all the living beings and creatures would be crushed into the smallest particles. This would not easily be avoided by escaping quickly or with strength, not by wealth, substances, mantras, or medicine. O great king, likewise, the 4 great fears cannot easily be avoided by escaping quickly or with strength, nor by substances, mantras, or medicine. What are these 4 fourfold things that cannot be avoided? old age, sickness, death, and decline. O great king, old age comes with the destruction of youth, sickness with the destruction of health, decline comes with the destruction of all your fortune, and death comes with the destruction of life. They cannot easily be avoided by escaping quickly or with strength, nor with wealth, substances, mantras, or medicine.
대단 디낭로야 개치슈도 찍디 깨가나치 셋 깨와 gawa nawa chiwa di dinga du steba na ke zamni ta ge droya re ma do ke wa zamni ta cher droya re ma do ani chuzu kama chik pile ya gu ni de ji me wa dinga zu thongora ra.
So of the essential points that came up in this section are the 4 processes that we go through: birth, sickness, aging, and death. You can say that just by mere birth, it is guaranteed that we will go through aging and death. And they cannot be, you cannot hold them at bay. It's not that you can ward off the aging process, even just for a few minutes, leaving things as they are without declining, without getting old. Just by mere being born, the next moment after birth, the process of aging kicks in.
Ko gedoyadi pigilaya shumatun rodeji madobi seginji degyo maras an samallo gen degyo marda lo shenshin chin de degorda ina tsawani suchi de tugmadas ra kolya jorwa da penjo da kari min da kone kariyo bainaya ani ko ranshin gedoyaji ko dingu binezu khora rendas.
So the process of aging cannot be stopped, not even for a few seconds. We cannot hold it off. And together with that, we still have the wish to remain young. It seems that in general, no one likes to get old. Most of us, if not all of us, want to remain young, and yet the process of aging cannot be stopped, not even for a few seconds. It doesn't matter who you are, what reputation you have, how wealthy you are, how much fame or what name you have done for yourself. No one can ward death off.
Terda odu sundroonida benataya chembuchani ma kanzamjila ma riare mado shindong da jigba shindong kadzus geba ro kadzus geba ditsogita ani ma riale ya ta ni dro tenza nganzu kadzus geba ditsogi chewala ta ni dro yoba kanji tindri jig tone ani chewa ngeba yimbadi semle ya ngeba le tubaina ta chibi kabdula ya karchigore 아니 신이 가리 연구를 세기 아니 싸움로디 연구열에서 다 아니 12내급 비기 속 12내급 아니 치차비 jelaya 아니 펜토에 여바지 소수 키토에 여바디 아니 쳇델야 아니 삼바상부지야 아니 셴라야 펜디드루야 간지 게비자와 가르사바 디기 팽그를 모두 셴바 쑥 강기 팽 말세 다 템비 다보 코랑기 두다진 송여러스 라 딩한주 셈라 다 니고에 디차고레스.
So the process of aging cannot be stopped. So in our life, we might grow bigger and bigger. And yet there will come a time in which we will fall down just like a trunk of a tree. That is inevitable. So a tree might grow to be big and solid, but still there will come a time in which even a big tree will fall down. So thinking about it, thinking about the inevitability of death, we might wonder, what then do I need to do? What will come after this life? What will occur to me in my future lifetimes? What would be of benefit to me? What can I carry with me from this lifetime to the next that will be of help? What will be of help, as the Buddha, the teacher, said in a very resolute way, is developing a kind heart, developing the wish to be of benefit to others. Nothing else could be of benefit, or nothing else would be what you can take with you to next lifetime other than these positive states of mind.
Terdenza tati dindigi kasoda chongrum rodi ro ani kangi dotu maris pena nga dan dotu maris mensan dotu maris soya dichi dinganza pena tsenga danya la soba ro ani chomden digi tsenga danya ani leberum ji tsenga danya ani da lamin tsenga danya di tarsu shoyoras ona da dindigi khen pendo yo marivese semla toba yonchogro daro the young kolia shivja yoras rodan pigi chidangi kini chiwi ngong chubdeadi korang chunyi chagar delia dotub yo mares menda ngada kangi yan dotug mares hine nganzu mesedi ko mi tseze ta chik lo jata chik samasam inza di nanglo la ya tu mahim bigi chigin singi mambushu tegores tuzula tenden pengores da ro nganzu ani lamukunjola ya sobatavya ani chik tsenga danya pena jizun dhimigi ani tsenga danya la sobadi ani tu mahim bigi ani tsigi parche la soba tenden pengores ro.
It says here in the section that we read through that substances and medicines and mantras and so forth cannot avoid death, in a sense that we cannot use them in order to ward off death. So in our tradition, there are ample recitations of certain mantras. Name mantra of the Buddha, our teacher, Guru Rinpoche, of different lamas and so forth. And since this section says that nothing can help in order to avoid death, mantras, substances, and so forth cannot help you to avoid death, you might be thinking, is there no benefit whatsoever then to doing such recitations? Is there no point in that at all? Well, it's not that there is no point in making such recitations. It's not that there is no point whatsoever. We recognize that we will not live for many, many centuries. It's not that we're going to live for hundreds of years. At some point, death will come, but what we want to do is to avoid untimely death. We want to avoid obstacles and difficulties contributing to untimely death. And certain recitations of name mantras, for example, the recitation of name mantras of certain gurus or Tara, the deity Tara, this can be helpful in terms of at least avoiding untimely death, avoiding obstacles and difficulties contributing to untimely death.
Sure.
That's all.
Sure.
So if you have no questions, we will leave it here for today. Have you got any questions? All right, let's leave it here for now. May the Supreme Jewel Bodhicitta that is not arisen, arise and grow, and that which is arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of the Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Savior of the Snowland teachings and transmigratory beings, who makes extremely clear the path that is unification of emptiness and compassion. To the lotus holder Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You uphold the subduer's moral way, who serves the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Majunat's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels. Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please live long.